Hands on the ground. Now. 16-year-old Malik Johnson froze. He had just stepped out of the corner store, grape soda in one hand, phone in the other. A knot of bystanders began to form as the shouting officer closed the distance. Malik turned, startled. What? The cop didn't wait for an answer. He lunged forward, grabbing Malik by the arm and spinning him to the ground. Malik's soda can exploded on impact, fizzing purple liquid across the concrete. His phone skittered away, screen shattering. A knee pressed into his back, hard. Stop resisting, the officer barked, although Malik hadn't moved. I'm not resisting. I didn't do anything. Malik gasped, his voice cracking under the weight of confusion and fear. A woman nearby had already started filming. Another man, too. That kid didn't do anything, he muttered, but didn't move closer. Nobody did. Before we begin, please write in the comments where you are watching from. And support us with a like and a subscribe. Malik's cheek was pressed to the hot pavement, his breath coming in sharp, panicked gulps. The officer patted him down aggressively, muttering something about a reported robbery. Description matches, he said to no one in particular. Malik was wearing a bright orange hoodie. The suspect had supposedly been in gray. No weapon was found. No stolen items. Just a pack of gum and a school ID. But that didn't stop the cuffs from snapping around his wrists. Please, Malik whispered, eyes darting around for someone, anyone, to step in. I didn't do anything. Call my dad. Please call my dad. The officer yanked him to his feet. You think you're special? He hissed. You think you can mouth off and walk away? Malik didn't respond. But if that officer had known who Malik's father was, he might have thought twice. Because the man walking into the precinct 45 minutes later wasn't just any dad. He was the director of the FBI. And he wasn't here for explanations. He was here for justice. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a cold, pale glare across the chipped metal table. Malik sat alone, wrists still cuffed, knuckles red from the scrape of the pavement. He blinked hard, refusing to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. The officer, badge reading R. Keller, stood outside the glass, arms folded, watching Malik like he was already guilty. A second officer leaned in the doorway, snickering. Kid's got attitude. Kept asking for a lawyer. Kept saying call my dad. Keller scoffed. Probably some broke baby daddy who won't pick up the phone. Behind the one-way mirror, the shift sergeant tapped on the glass. Bring him in, he said. Keller stepped into the room, placing a thick file down on the table with unnecessary force. Let's talk about the robbery, huh? Malik shook his head slowly. I didn't steal anything. I just bought a soda. The officer smiled, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Funny. Guy at the gas station says the suspect ran that direction. Hoodie, black male, mid-teens. That you? I was already inside the store when the alarm went off, Malik said. They have cameras. Check them. But Keller wasn't interested in evidence. He was interested in control. He leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. How about you stop lying before I charge you with obstruction? Malik swallowed hard, heart pounding, mind racing. He felt trapped, small, alone. Outside the room, the sergeant's phone rang. He answered, and immediately stood straighter. Yes, sir. Yes. We have the suspect in custody. A pause. You're who? Silence. The sergeant's eyes widened. Right away, sir. He turned to the officers. Everyone clear out. Now. Keller frowned. What's going on? The sergeant didn't answer. Because down the hallway, the heavy front doors of the precinct swung open, and in walked a tall, sharply dressed black man, flanked by two federal agents. He flashed a badge. The seal gleamed gold under the harsh lights. Director Jamal Johnson, FBI. The room went silent. And Officer Keller? His blood ran cold. Because the boy they'd just shoved into a cell was his son. The echo of Director Jamal Johnson's footsteps down the tiled hallway was louder than it should have been. Each step deliberate, heavy, final. No one said a word. The front desk officer instinctively stood up, then realized he was already too late. The director's eyes swept the precinct like a laser. Not frantic, not angry, just surgical, cold. "Where is he?" he asked, voice low but unmistakably commanding. The sergeant stammered. "Room 2, sir. He's being processed." "Processed?" Johnson repeated, more to himself than anyone else. "For what?" No one answered. He didn't wait. By the time Director Johnson reached the interrogation room, Officer Keller was just stepping out, confused, annoyed, and then frozen. The director stopped inches away. "Keller, is it?" His voice was quiet, calm, terrifying. "Yes, sir, I was. You assaulted a minor. Illegally detained him. No probable cause. No attorney. And you denied him a phone call." Keller's mouth opened, then closed. "He matched the description, sir." "Which description?" Johnson snapped. "Because I've read the bolo. The suspect was 5'8", gray hoodie, short dreads. My son is 5'5", wearing bright orange, and has close-cropped hair." Don't interrupt me." The weight of those 4 words crushed every excuse forming on Keller's tongue. Behind them, a group of officers had gathered quietly, unsure whether to look away or bear witness. Director Johnson turned to the sergeant. "Uncuff him, now, and get internal affairs on the phone." The sergeant didn't move, so the director took a step closer. "Or I'll have your badge within the hour." The cuffs were off within seconds. Malik stood, shoulders tense, his father at his side. Director Johnson placed a hand on his son's back, gentle, grounding. "You okay?" he asked softly. Malik nodded, but barely. The boy hadn't said a word since they brought him in. Johnson looked back toward the officers, and the air shifted, because they weren't dealing with some angry parent anymore. They were dealing with a man who ran the system they thought they owned. And he was just getting started. The video hit the internet like a lightning strike. Someone in the crowd outside the convenience store had posted it to TikTok just minutes after Malik's arrest. Shaky footage, but clear enough. A black teenager slammed to the ground. Grapevine soda exploding across the pavement. Hands behind his back. Pleading. Crying out, "I didn't do anything." The caption read, "He just bought a soda." They tackled him like he was armed. Hashtag justice for Malik. Hashtag this is every day. Hashtag racial profiling. By midnight, it had over 2 million views. News stations picked it up. Social justice pages reposted it. Students from Malik's high school began organizing a protest. Not just because of what happened, but because it was him. Malik, the kid who tutored other students after class. Who never caused trouble. Who once led a campaign to get healthier snacks in the school vending machines. People were angry. But it wasn't just rage anymore. It was awakening. And inside the precinct, the walls were closing in. Director Johnson stood before the precinct's captain, a man who looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. "You knew," Johnson said. "Your officers saw a black boy and made assumptions. You saw a father and thought he'd beg. You saw a badge and thought it made you untouchable." The captain wiped sweat from his brow. "Director Johnson, I assure you. You don't need to assure me." Johnson opened a file and slid it across the table. "I have a full transcript. Witness statements. Body cam footage. Or should I say the body cam footage Keller forgot to turn off." The captain's eyes widened. Johnson's voice hardened. "This department is under federal review starting now. And you're going to cooperate. Because this isn't just about my son." He pointed to the video playing silently on the nearby monitor. "This is about every child like him who didn't have a father in my position to walk through those doors." The precinct conference room felt more like a courtroom now. A circle of high-ranking officers, legal counsel, and federal investigators sat around the long oak table. Director Johnson stood at the head, hands planted firmly on the surface, eyes locked on the captain. "I want every incident report involving Officer Keller for the past 5 years," he said. "And not just his. I want every stop, every arrest, every complaint this precinct has ignored or buried." The room was silent, until someone finally asked, "How far back are we going?" Johnson didn't blink. "All of it." One officer shifted uncomfortably. Another scribbled notes without making eye contact. Then came the soft, uncertain voice of Lieutenant Sosa, the only woman of color in the room. "This goes deep," she said. "I filed internal complaints about Keller. About others. They went nowhere." Johnson turned to her. "How many?" Sosa hesitated. "4. Maybe more. They always said there wasn't enough to take action. Or told me not to cause trouble." Johnson nodded slowly. "Not anymore." Outside, the station buzzed with reporters. The protest Malik's classmates had started had doubled in size by morning. Local news vans lined the block. Handwritten signs filled the air like flags of resistance. "Justice for Malik. We could have been him. Fire Keller." And inside Malik's home, the one with the tall red door and a porch swing his father built, the boy at the center of it all sat in silence, scrolling through hundreds of messages. Some angry, some grateful, some from kids he'd never met, saying, "I'm scared too." He looked up at his father, who had just walked in from the precinct, tie loosened, jaw tight. "Dad," Malik said, voice quiet. "Why does this keep happening?" Director Johnson looked at his son, then knelt in front of him, his voice calm but heavy. "Because people like Keller were never taught to see you as human." Then he placed a hand over Malik's heart. "But that's what we're going to change." Officer Keller was called into a closed-door meeting. He didn't know that, just one room over, Director Johnson and 2 federal investigators were watching a curated reel of body cam clips, not just from Malik's arrest, but from dozens of other stops. Black driver. Young. Minor infraction. Each one played like a pattern repeating itself. Tone escalating. Aggression quick to surface. Language laced with barely masked contempt. And in every video, Keller's voice was the same. Sharp. Commanding. Condescending. Like he enjoyed it. One investigator turned to Johnson, murmuring, "He's not just biased. He's performing power." Johnson leaned forward, eyes fixed on the screen. "Which means," he said, "he's not acting alone." Back in the meeting room, Keller sat with arms folded across his chest, trying to look unbothered. But sweat had started to form beneath his collar. He could feel the shift. They weren't asking him questions. They were watching him. "Officer Keller," said one of the agents, "do you recall a traffic stop from June 4th, 3 months ago? 18-year-old male. No priors. Stopped for a license plate light?" Keller squinted. "I stop a lot of people. I don't recall specifics." "We do," the agent replied. "You cuffed him, called him boy, threatened to impound the car because he questioned your tone." Keller's jaw tightened. "That's protocol." The agent raised an eyebrow. "Is it?" Silence. Then the door opened, and Director Johnson stepped inside. Keller straightened instantly, like a soldier facing inspection. But the director didn't even sit. He walked directly to the table, placed a manila envelope in front of Keller, and said 4 words. "Turn in your badge." Keller's face flushed. "You can't just." "I can. And I am." Johnson's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Because what you did to my son wasn't your first offense. It was your most visible. But we've been collecting what the system ignored." He leaned in. "And we're not just removing you." He tapped the envelope. "We're investigating the entire culture that let you thrive." By the time the press got wind that Officer Keller had been relieved of duty, the city had already begun to split. To some, it was justice, overdue, necessary. To others, it was betrayal, a good cop scapegoated for doing his job. The narrative battle had begun, and Director Johnson knew the stakes weren't just about Keller anymore. They were about the system that built him. In City Hall, Johnson met with the mayor behind closed doors. The air was thick with tension. "You've got people marching on both sides," the mayor said. "Cops threatening walkouts. Protesters calling for resignations. And the footage keeps spreading. What's your endgame, Jamal?" Johnson's voice was quiet. "My son was nearly buried by a badge meant to protect him," he said. "This isn't about an endgame. It's about rebuilding trust from the ashes." Meanwhile, in a quiet high school hallway, Malik walked beside his teacher, Ms. Evans, the only black educator in the building. Her heels clicked softly on the tile as they walked. "They suspended him," she said, referring to Keller. Malik gave a small nod. "You okay?" I don't know, he admitted. You don't have to be, she replied gently. But what you did, staying calm, standing up for yourself, surviving that, it matters. He looked at her. It doesn't feel like it. It will, she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Because the truth is finally louder than their assumptions. At home that night, Director Johnson watched his son sleep, the boy curled under a blanket, earbuds still in, a cracked phone charging on the dresser. Johnson clenched his jaw. He had delivered Keller to accountability. Now he had to confront the machine behind him. The next morning, Director Johnson sat alone in his office, a clean, wood-paneled room lined with federal commendations and photos of his career milestones. But his eyes weren't on the plaques. They were on a single file in front of him. Officer Russell Keller. Suspended. Under federal investigation. The real story, though, wasn't in the headline. It was in the names tucked between the lines. Johnson flipped through the pages. A 19-year-old girl, pulled from her car and left sobbing on the sidewalk. A 22-year-old black man, arrested for loitering outside his own apartment building. A father handcuffed in front of his children over a supposed parking violation. Every complaint dismissed. Every internal review closed with 2 words. Insufficient evidence. But something new caught Johnson's eye now. The initials of the officers who processed those dismissals. Over and over again. CM, CM, CM. He leaned back, blood pulsing in his ears. Captain Mark Caldwell, Keller's supervisor. The man who'd once told him, "We've got it under control." It wasn't just that Keller had been protected. It was that he'd been groomed, shielded, enabled. Johnson stood, heart pounding, and picked up the phone. "Get me internal audit. I want every complaint reviewed. Every dismissal signed off by Captain Caldwell brought to my office today." "But sir," today. He hung up, jaw set. Because if Keller was the face of the rot, Caldwell was the root. The audit reports came in faster than expected, a stack of folders so thick, Johnson had to clear an entire table just to lay them out. Each file was a name, a story, a red flag ignored. And at the bottom of nearly every dismissal form was the same signature, scribbled with bureaucratic confidence. CM, Caldwell. Internal Affairs agents circled keywords in silence. Non-compliant, resisted questioning, matched description. Over and over. Different victims. Same script. Same cover-up. Director Johnson scanned one form dated 2 years ago. A 15-year-old boy accused of shoplifting. Detained. No proof. Let go after 3 hours. Complaint filed by the boy's mother. Dismissed. Lack of corroborating evidence. Signed, C.M. Caldwell. Johnson tapped the paper, his voice cold. He buried this one. There was footage. It never got logged. The lead auditor looked up. Captain Caldwell's internal systems were completely off-book. A lot of these never made it to formal review. And no one thought to question that. The agent hesitated. No one with your clearance did. That afternoon, Johnson walked into Captain Caldwell's office without knocking. The captain looked up from his desk, half-smile in place. "Director, you're becoming a regular guest." Johnson didn't sit, didn't blink. "You're under federal review for obstruction, abuse of authority, and gross negligence." The smile slipped. "Excuse me. You built a firewall of denial around Keller and others like him. Every time someone tried to hold them accountable, you shut it down." Caldwell rose, voice low. "You don't have proof. I have the paper trail you thought would stay buried." He stepped closer. "And I have something more dangerous." Caldwell scoffed, trying to recover. "What's that?" Johnson leaned in. "The truth. And this time, it's not going away quietly." That night, Director Johnson did something he hadn't planned, something no FBI director in recent memory had done. He stood before a packed community town hall in the heart of the city. Not in a federal building. Not behind a podium surrounded by agents. But inside a high school gym. Folding chairs, fluorescent lights, local journalists, parents, teachers, activists, and students all watching. And at the center of the front row sat Malik. Still quiet. Still processing. Johnson stepped up to the mic. No script. No notes. Just the weight of what had been done and what still needed doing. My son was thrown to the ground for buying a soda, he began. And that moment, filmed, shared, dissected, is just one in a sea of unseen injustices that happen every day to black and brown children across this country. A hush fell. And what makes this worse, he continued, is not just the officer who tackled him or the captain who protected that officer. It's the silence, the shrug, the system that tells us, you're lucky if you survive, grateful if anyone believes you. People shifted in their seats, not from discomfort, but recognition. Then he added, his voice softening, but we are not powerless. He turned slightly, eyes landing on Malik. We are witnesses. And when the truth is witnessed, truly seen, we are obligated to act. Applause broke, then cheers, then a wave of emotion that swept across the room like a tide. And Malik? He stood up, slowly, uncertainly, and the crowd rose with him. Because this story was no longer just about what happened to him. It was about what was being rebuilt from the rubble. And now, the whole city was watching. The next morning, the dominoes started to fall. Captain Caldwell resigned. No press conference. No apology. Just a terse statement submitted through legal counsel, claiming health reasons and irreconcilable differences with federal oversight. But the investigations continued, and the list of names grew. Officers with patterns of excessive force. Internal reviewers who consistently looked the other way. Quiet settlements. Sealed complaints. Ghost files. The wall they'd built to protect their own. It was cracking. Director Johnson sat in his office, looking over a new report. It wasn't just his city. Other precincts were now under pressure. Journalists were digging. Protesters were organizing in cities across the state. Because if it happened to Malik, the son of the FBI director, what chance did any other kid have? An aide knocked on the door. Sir, there's someone here to see you. Who is it? The aide paused. A mother. From 2 years ago. Her son's case was buried under Caldwell's watch. She says you're the first person she trusts to listen. Johnson stood. Bring her in. And in walked a woman carrying a worn-out folder, edges frayed, papers yellowed from time. She sat across from Johnson, placed the folder on his desk, and whispered. They called him a thug. Said he resisted. But he didn't. He was just scared. Johnson opened the file. A mugshot of a boy who looked no older than Malik stared back at him. Eyes full of fear, face bruised. And Johnson made a silent promise right then. This wasn't just a crusade anymore. It was a reckoning. 2 days later, in Washington, D.C., the halls of federal leadership buzzed, not with small talk, but with questions that couldn't be ignored anymore. Because what started as a local story had gone national. Cable news, op-eds, editorial boards demanding change. Even late-night hosts were talking about Malik Johnson and how a soda run turned into a symbol of everything broken. Behind closed doors, a high-level DOJ meeting convened. Director Johnson stood across from a row of sharply dressed officials, suits with years of experience, but eyes that looked unsure now. We need to talk reform, one of them said, adjusting his tie. We need to talk federal precedent, Johnson countered. Because if we don't set one now, this country will remember that silence more than any press release. Another official, older, weary-eyed, pushed back. But policy doesn't change hearts, Jamal. You know that. Johnson's reply came like a blade. Policy doesn't need to change hearts. It needs to check them. He dropped a thick proposal on the table, titled, The Malik Initiative, Federal Oversight, Youth Protections, and Police Accountability. No more buried complaints. No more quiet reassignments. National review boards. Mandatory bias de-escalation training. Body cam transparency. The room went still, because no one could deny it anymore. One viral moment had cracked open a national wound. And the man leading the charge? He wasn't just an FBI director anymore. He was a father, and a mirror the whole country was being forced to look into. It started with 5 names, then 10, then 16, one by one. Officers connected to complaints buried under Caldwell's command were placed on immediate administrative leave. Some were stunned. Others walked out in silence. A few, still defiant, called it a witch hunt, but the evidence spoke louder than outrage. Internal Affairs released a statement. These suspensions are not punitive. They are protective of the public, of the process, and of the truth. The community response was electric. At Malik's school, students walked out again, this time not in protest, but in honor. They carried signs that said, "He survived. We see you, Malik. Justice looks like action." And Malik? He stood among them, still quiet, but standing taller. A local reporter stopped him near the school gates. "Do you feel like justice is being served?" Malik paused, then said, "I feel like people are finally realizing justice isn't a moment. It's a movement." At home, his father watched the clip, the hint of a smile at the corners of his mouth. But the smile didn't last long. Because the next morning, Johnson's office received a new envelope, anonymous. Inside, a flash drive. In a single line written on the paper, it was taped to. Keller was never the worst of them. The drive was unmarked. No label. No traceable origin. Director Johnson loaded it onto a secure federal laptop. The room darkened, the door locked. What played next made his jaw tighten. Dashcam footage. Body cam footage. Locker room footage. All with dates stretching back nearly 8 years. In one clip, officers laughed over a rough takedown. In another, a young black man was mocked after being tossed. Off camera, but clearly audible. None of these incidents were in any official records. Not even in the complaint system. They had been scrubbed, deleted, hidden like shameful secrets beneath layers of red tape. But someone had saved them. A whistleblower, maybe. Someone still inside the department. Someone tired of watching it rot from within. Johnson leaned back, feeling the full weight of what he now held. Undeniable, visual proof of systemic abuse. Not just from one officer, not just from one captain, but from a culture that thought it could hide behind silence. He picked up the phone. "Give me a press conference. National coverage." "But sir, don't we need to verify?" "We verify by exposing it. If we wait, they'll bury it again." Later that evening, Johnson addressed the country, live. He didn't open with politics. He didn't open with blame. He opened with footage. 3 minutes of silence broken only by the videos he received. Raw, brutal, real. Then he said, "This is what happens when oversight fails. This is what happens when we accept injustice as an accident, not a pattern." The country didn't just hear him. It felt him. And the system? It was now under fire from every direction. By the end of the week, it was no longer just a city in protest. It was a nation in reckoning. State attorneys general launched independent reviews. Congressional leaders, including ones who had once avoided the topic of policing reform, now demanded hearings. And in the precinct where Malik was arrested, entire shifts were reshuffled. Officers who had once walked the halls with smug immunity now entered in silence, unsure who might be watching, unsure what might surface next. A new acting chief was sworn in. Her first words to the force were simple. "If you're afraid of accountability, you should be." In the Johnson household, the atmosphere had changed too. Not calmer, not yet, but clearer. Malik sat with his father at the kitchen table, a newspaper in front of them. On the cover, a still of Johnson from the press conference, hands folded, eyes unwavering. "You didn't hold back," Malik said, half proud, half stunned. Johnson looked over. "Neither did you. I didn't do anything. You stayed calm. You stayed alive. And now you're speaking truth to the world." Malik glanced away. "I didn't ask for that." "No," Johnson replied. "But sometimes the moment asks for you. And you answered." That night, Malik opened a message from a stranger. "My son saw your story. He's scared of the police. But when he saw you on the news, he asked if maybe things could change." Malik read it twice. Then he smiled, small but real. Because for the first time in days, he didn't feel like a victim. He felt like a catalyst. 3 months later, the city unveiled a new community center downtown. Bright glass walls, open classrooms, and a mural that stretched 3 stories high. At its center, the face of a young black boy, eyes wide, jaw set, painted from the now famous footage of Malik on the pavement, just before he was cuffed. But in the mural, he was rising. Above him were the names of other youth wrongly profiled, misjudged, erased, not as martyrs, but as witnesses, survivors, sparks. Below it, a quote in bold white letters. Justice is not a moment. It's what we do when the cameras stop rolling. Director Jamal Johnson. At the ribbon cutting, Malik stood beside his father. He'd grown more into himself, no longer just the kid from that video, but a voice being heard in school board meetings, youth panels, and local reform coalitions. The mayor spoke first. The new police chief followed. But the final words belonged to Malik. He stepped up to the podium, voice calm, eyes scanning the crowd. I didn't ask to be a symbol, he began. I just wanted a soda. I just wanted to walk home. A pause. But if what happened to me helps keep another kid from hitting that pavement, if it changes how officers are trained, how complaints are handled, how truth is seen. He looked at the mural, the boy who used to be him. Then I'm proud of what we started. And with that, he stepped back. A quiet fell over the crowd. Not because it was over, but because they understood it wasn't. This wasn't a story about one boy, or one cop, or even one city. It was about a system finally being forced to see itself, and a father, a son, and a moment that cracked it open. Justice didn't end with handcuffs. It began after them. Thank you for watching. Subscribe me and hit the notification bell to not miss new stories. Bye.